All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are 10 weeks through the NFL season, so I think it's time we take a break from our normal fantasy analysis and entertain a mid-season mock draft. Kind of a fun, different avenue to explain kind of the needs and states of the team around all 32 NFL teams while talking about potential prospects for the upcoming 2024 draft from college football. So as always, like the video, comment down below what you think of these draft picks or who you would have picked for your own team. Subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and I'll see you on the other side of that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football. Today we are doing a mid-season mock draft. I think at this point, 10 weeks into the NFL as well as the college football season, we have gathered enough of a sample size to understand where the pros and deficiencies of which NFL teams are so far and how they may look to address those needs in the upcoming draft. Also, we've looked at enough college football to determine who are the risers, who are the fallers, who is establishing themselves as a bona fide first round prospect, and who are some names I want to highlight that could ease their way into the first round come April 2024. Now, we're going to be doing only one round this episode. Don't want to get too much into the weeds. Don't want to make it too long or arduous. So we're only going to go through the first round, only the teams that have picks in the first round. We're going off of the order that PFF does provide to us. So it's based off of current records, not current playoff or current Super Bowl odds. I think that's probably a bit more accurate way to determine this, because as going through this and prefacing and writing out this mock draft ahead of time, we do see the Jacksonville Jaguars with the 28th or 29th pick based off their record. I don't think that's indicative of where they're going to be picking in 2024, but that's just the way it's going to be represented here. And, you know, this isn't going to be even close to remotely accurate. It's just a way for us to talk about teams and their potential needs and the current state of the teams through 10 weeks in the NFL. Also, we're not going to be doing any trades. Again, the NFL is too volatile. There's too much parity. There's too much left to play out through the rest of the season for us to even entertain trying to make this more complicated through trades. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk through each pick in the first round. Let's go ahead and start the draft. I mean, to no one's shock, we'll be taking Caleb Williams here with the first overall pick. Listen, I get it. Justin Fields is a talented prospect. He hasn't had enough time to develop in the NFL. You know, his kind of rookie season was a wash. He had a coaching change. He's been injured for quite a bit of the 2023 season. But when you're in a position with the Chicago Bears, you have the number one overall pick in back-to-back years. Something is not working. I outlined my hesitancies around Justin Fields taking that leap as a passer prior to the season, and I'll go ahead and reiterate, you know, when we look at guys like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, they had showed linear progression through the NFL and ability to advance their passing game. With Justin Fields, it's been more of a regression of his passing game since his time at Ohio State, and I've always advocated for the fact that it's easier to predict advancement or growth with someone who's demonstrated progression previously, not with someone who's trying to recapture something they have lost. I think with Eberflus on the hot seat, with Ryan Poles on the hot seat, with this regime potentially changing, even if they do keep the same regime, this is not the same regime that drafted Justin Fields. I think when you have the number one overall pick, when you have a guy like Caleb Williams on the board for you to take, this year has been pretty indicative that the current experiment might not be the best. And hey, give Justin Fields time to develop. He might figure it out. But this is a what have you done for me lately league, and that's going to be Caleb Williams. Moving on to our number 2 pick with the New York Giants, it's going to be Drake May. This may shock a lot of people, especially after the $160 million contract the general management of the New York Giants levied out to Daniel Jones this past offseason. But I'm not a general manager. I don't have to worry about, you know, I know there's a lot of stuff that goes into roster construction outside of just who plays well and who doesn't play well. There's cap constraints, there's dead money, there's all sorts of facets into bringing in players and how you want to build a roster. But me sitting in my office here, not having to answer to a team president or an owner, I don't have to really concern myself with that as much. Yes, I want to take that into a factor. When I'm making these draft picks, I'm not going to make something that's wildly unreasonable, but in my personal opinion, I think it's better for yourself to admit the mistakes that you have made and move on from them despite the dead money that you will be impacted with. I think right now, the current state of the New York Giants is absolutely atrocious. They went out, they tried to build off of the success of last season, and it did not work. I think, you know, the investment in bringing in Darren Waller, they got to let that go. The investment in Daniel Jones, That did not work. They have to move on. Listen, last season was an outlier, and we acknowledge that. But the regression that they experienced from 2022 to 2023 was far greater than what anyone had anticipated. And sitting here, picking in the top 5, let alone at the second pick, you got to address the most important need on the football field. That's going to be quarterback with a guy like Drake May, who would have been the number 1 overall pick in many of the most recent drafts up until Trevor Lawrence. Daniel Jones just hasn't separated himself as an elite passer, and to get to the next level and to compete, you need a guy like Drake May. You got to move on. For the New England Patriots, I think currently in the way this sits, I mean, if this is in real life, we're doing a very predictive mock draft, I assume they trade out of this position. They need a lot more. The team is struggling quite a bit, and they need a lot of positions to be fixed in order to be competing again in the AFC, let alone the AFC East. But right now, the Mac Jones experiment, you got to admit that this has failed. I understand they had spent the first round pick on him no less, I was like 3 years ago in the 2021 draft. However, it's not going to work. He was benched in a game-winning drive decision this past weekend in Germany against the Indianapolis Colts. He has lost all confidence despite what you want to attribute to his rookie season success. He has lost all confidence. He has not established himself as a franchise quarterback going forward. I think there's a lot of hot seats that are developing in the Patriots organization right now, one of which, if not the hottest, is going to be the one on which Mac Jones sits as the starting quarterback. I don't think it's out of the world of possibility that they draft another quarterback here. You have to keep taking that swings. You have to keep trying to bring in a passer. I don't think it's out of the possibility that, we know how interconnected the Patriots organization and the Patriots culture is. They could try to bring in a Jimmy Garoppolo after he's overstayed his welcome in less than a year when it comes to the Las Vegas Raiders. However, we're going to analyze this agnostic of any offseason moves, and we're going to look at this and say, who would they be taking out a quarterback if they were forced to draft one? My personal opinion, I don't have this guy as my quarterback 3 off the board, but what I've heard from, scouting reports, general managers, comments, all that other stuff, JJ McCarthy is currently the 3rd quarterback in the 2024 draft class as per the way the NFL GMs view him. They like his arm talent. They like the natural traits he possesses, and he's just been absolutely dominant so far in the college football season for Michigan. So 3rd quarterback off the board would be JJ McCarthy, and I don't think that's wild to think that the Patriots end up with him in this draft. Moving on to number 4, Marvin Harrison Jr., the one of, if not the blue chip prospect, unbelievable wide receiver prospect. And, with Marquise Brown, with Rondale Moore on an expiring contract, with Marquise Brown's contract's about to come up. I mean, I think Kyler Murray just demonstrated enough in this past weekend against the Atlanta Falcons to show that he's going to be the long-term plan. Also, we talk about admitting your mistakes, but I don't think Kyler Murray, the contract they gave him was that much of a mistake. I think moving on from it would handicap the team too much, as well as be too detrimental to the rebuild of this team. I think Kyler Murray still is quite a talented quarterback. He's demonstrated he is able to be an elite passer at the NFL level. You bring in Marvin Harrison, you build around Kyler, you go forward, and I think it's going to be a wonderful draft pick here at 4. I think this is going to be the pick of the draft for them. Moving on to the Chicago Bears. Listen, you got your quarterback at the top of the draft. You got your generational guy in Caleb Williams. Now you got to protect him. You actually do have a pretty decent wide receiver room around him. I like Darnell Mooney. DJ Moore is a really good wide receiver. I think you can find, this is a very deep wide receiver class that I think, we'll talk about that much later on in this draft, but you can find a lot of great talent at wide receiver further on down the draft board. I think the limited position here in the 2024 draft is going to be the high-end talent at offensive tackle. Olu Fashanu was a guy I loved in the 2023 class who ended up going back to Penn State, and he still remains a top prospect here in the 2024 draft class. Bringing him in from Penn State, incredible boon to the offensive line for the Chicago Bears here. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers, is going to be another offensive tackle for the Packers. Just looking at the Packers organization, there's been a lot of concern around Jordan Love and if he's going to be the long-term answer at the quarterback position for the Packers. There have been some questionable comments by GM, Gutekunst, and, they haven't been as committed to Jordan Love going forward. But right now you have to understand that this has been a horrific situation that they have thrust Jordan Love in for his first season as a true starter. He's been just surrounded by a plethora of injuries, the worst of which probably is David Bakhtiari going down after week 3. And I think if we look at the disparity in quarterback grade between the first 3 weeks of the season and the rest of the season post David Bakhtiari injury, that's where we see a massive delta in how Jordan Love has performed. He isn't giving the time to let plays develop down the field. He isn't being allowed the time to go through all of his looks and all of his reads. You got to shore up the offensive line. You need to give him time to, let the play develop. Joe Alt, offensive tackle out of Notre Dame, is going to be an absolute amazing pick to help bolster that offensive line for Green Bay Packers. Los Angeles Rams, they could draft a quarterback here. Stafford is dealing with a ton of injuries. He's a little bit older. But I think with J.J. Drake and Caleb all off the board here, I think it's a little bit too high to reach on any of the other quarterback prospects here in the 2024 class. However, offensive line, again, they would love to have a Joe Alt or an Olu Fashanu here. Unfortunately, they both get taken off the board due to how valuable they are. So we have to look to the defensive line, something that's kind of struggled outside of Aaron Donald. They need a lot of help on the defensive line. And listen, Matt Latu has been a great prospect, but there are a ton of medical red flags surrounding him. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to take edge rusher out of Penn State, Chop Robinson. I'm not sure who told us, or who sent out this tweet, but there's been a correlation between certain programs and NFL players making an immediate or college players making an immediate impact at the NFL level. Ohio State's obviously the most obvious one. You look at Nick Bosa, defensive rookie of the year. Chase Young, defensive rookie of the year. CJ Stroud, offensive rookie of the year. Garrett Wilson, offensive rookie of the year. And I'm missing another one that they had listed in that tweet. But again, I feel like I really don't want to be, pigeonholed into helmet scouting. Chop Robinson, Micah Parsons, blah, blah, blah. But, we look at the prospects, the NFL prospects that Penn State has been able to churn out in recent years, not one of which is Micah Parsons, but also look at the amazing season so far that Joey Porter Jr. has had for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they produce these top-tier athletes that acclimate very well to the NFL system. Chop Robinson is a guy that I think is just a height, weight, speed freak when it comes to an edge rusher, and I think he would be an incredible addition, and I don't think it's a while to proclaim him being the top edge rusher off the board in the 2024 class. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans. Listen, taking a quarterback in the third straight draft would be absolute malpractice and a waste of value of your picks. So far, despite a somewhat subpar performance this past weekend, Will Levis has done enough to show you that he's going to be the plan, at least going forward for this year and next year. I love his arm talent. I love the ability to zip it on a dime with just a flick of his wrist. But where he struggles is in his accuracy. And, again, we've talked about so far as general managers needing to admit that they've made mistakes in draft and not hold on to those mistakes, but to rectify them as soon as possible. So when we look at what's going to be the best help to the development of Will Levis, well, obviously we have DeAndre Hopkins there, but we do need another wide receiver. Treylon Burks is looking like a bust at this point, and I don't know if his tenure in the NFL is going to last much longer. So we look at the wide receiver. Malik Neighbors is a great wide receiver prospect, but my personal wide receiver 2 in this class is going to be Keon Coleman. So I'm going to have him here going to the Tennessee Titans. He's just a guy that insane at the catch point, absolute incredible catch radius and, downfield threat, end zone target, exactly the guy is going to pair really, really well with Will Levis, who has the ability to fire it downfield, place it on a dime, but has maybe a tad of an issue struggling with accuracy. Keon Coleman will be able to grab those balls that are a little bit off target and be a great connection for years to come. All right, Atlanta Falcons. Listen, trying to go into the mind of Arthur Smith might be an exercise in insanity. Hopefully they, after this current losing streak, they go in and bring in a more competent, more well-adjusted head coach. Because, listen, right now, Arthur Smith, I don't know if he doesn't coach the way that, he coaches the way that he doesn't really have to worry about his job, because he doesn't. He's the son of a billionaire who started in CEO of, sorry, not started, but he was the CEO of FedEx. And if we want to talk about, in getting into the weeds of Arthur Smith, about nepotism to the nth degree, his first position in the NFL was a defensive quality assistant for the Washington Commanders, who play at FedEx Field. You're drawing the lines now. I see you. You got it. Let's move on before I descend into absolute madness on Arthur Smith. But right now, they have so many elite weapons around the quarterback. There's no reason why they should be losing these games. They need, first off, a better play caller. So if you could trade this first round pick for literally any other coach, I would be doing that. Or if you could draft a coach, I would be doing that as well. But you can't in the current PFF mock draft simulator. So we'll have to go with someone who can better execute the offensive plays, because currently Desmond Ridder, I mean, we saw it in the game against the Washington Commanders. He's just not accurate. Doesn't have the arm strength to take advantage of a Drake London or a Kyle Pitts down the field. It is just, you need an upgrade at the quarterback position. And I know I'll get a lot of pushback on this, but right now, despite the injury concerns, despite the age concerns, Michael Penix Jr. is currently my quarterback 3 in the 2024 class. I love everything he's put on film for the University of Washington. I think he's incredibly intelligent when it comes to reading defenses and making plays. I think he's very underrated and will be a very, very high quality game manager at the NFL level. And that's what they need in Atlanta. I think he pairs perfectly with the offensive system they have in place. He is a mobile quarterback. He can stretch plays and has the arm strength to get it down the field to Kyle Pitts and Drake London. So Michael Penix Jr., Taylor Heineke is in it. Desmond Ridder is in it. I think you need to keep taking shots on a quarterback. Try to find that franchise guy or something close to a franchise guy. So you got to take a shot at Michael Penix here in the top 10. Moving on to the Washington Commanders. I mean, this one's really easy, right? They got rid of two of the best edge rushers in the NFL, and Montez Sweat and Chase Young. So, I mean, we look down here on the board, and we have one of the best edge rushers, in my opinion. I'm not sure why PFF has him ranked so low, but he is just an absolute freak. I have him as our edge rusher 2, right behind Chop Robinson. I think he's just absolutely crazy. He's an absolute game wrecker. Comes from a very pro-ready system in Alabama. They need edge really badly. We saw that against the Seattle Seahawks in Week 10. So I think this is a no-brainer pick here. You look at the positional value of the edge rusher of what Dallas Turner can provide, and you draft him here at number 10. All right. Is it crazy? Is it crazy to have 5 quarterbacks go in a draft in the first round? Guess what? We saw it happen not 3 years ago in the 2021 draft. And I think given the depth, first off, the depth of the quarterback class in 2024, but also just the absolute need of quarterback talent at the NFL right now, I don't think it's out of the question that you see 5 of these guys go off the board early here in 2024. So far in 2024, we've had 10 rookies start for NFL teams, which just kind of goes to show you the lack of quality starters at the NFL level. So you're going to see a lot of these teams swinging for the fences with some of these prospects coming out at the college level. Listen, there's a lot of needs that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers need. You could get an edge rusher in the Atalatu, but frankly, with medical concerns, he will not even be on some people's boards. He was medically retired at some point. So, I mean, he'll be a do-not draft for some players. You got good wide receiver options already there. Maybe Mike Evans comes back. They have Chris Godwin under contract. I don't think you need to go for Malik Neighbors right now. Brock Bowers, listen, you have Cade Otton. The positional value of a tight end isn't there to take him here at the 11th position. Outside of Kyle Pitts, we really don't see tight ends go this high in drafts. So, yeah. Baker Mayfield, not the long-term answer. Bo Nix could be the long-term answer, could be a franchise guy. You got to take this. You got to take a swing, just like I talked about with the Atlanta Falcons. You have to take the swing on the franchise guy at the quarterback position. Bo Nix will be going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this is where we're going to stop the fall of Brock Bowers. This is the New York Jets team that is in win now mode. They've traded for Aaron Rodgers so they could go out and compete. Aaron Rodgers should be back. If not by the end of the 2023 season, he will be back for the 2024 season. There's no reason to, prep for the future. No reason to go out and build safety blankets. You need to invest as much as you can to win right now. This is your window. This is your 1-year window. You have Brock Bowers. You don't have a great tight end. The tight ends with Aaron Rodgers, I mean, his metrics when you utilize tight ends, they have 2 times the NFL average when it comes to end zone target share of his tight ends. Aaron Rodgers loves his tight ends. And also Brock Bowers will be a great addition to that offensive line as far as blocking prowess. He's a blue chip prospect as anyone comes across in this draft class. Brock Bowers to the Jets is an absolute smash pick. I was even projecting him taking tight end in the 2023 draft as well. I think it's something they could really, really use. Moving on to the Denver Broncos. Big win for them last night against the Buffalo Bills. I think this is actually quite an easy pick here for the Denver Broncos. Russ looks competent, and I mean, I'm not a big Russ fan, so not like I'm going out on a limb to like really hype up Russ, but he looked really good. I think with the contract they've given him, they are a little hamstrung by that. I don't think you try to move on from him in this offseason. I think you try to keep it going, and you kind of run the course with this Russell Wilson contract, at least for the next 1 or 2 years. Where they need help is their defensive line. Their defensive line is absolutely freaking atrocious. I do want to talk about, they do say wide receivers in need here. They didn't trade Cortland Sutton at the deadline. They didn't trade Jerry Jeudy. They're both under contract. I think, again, deep wide receiver class. They can address it later on. Right here, you look at a guy like Johnny Newton, a top tier defensive line prospect. Their defensive line is absolutely abysmal. He can line up inside. He can line up outside. I think this is an absolute smash pick if Johnny Newton falls down to the 13th pick for the Denver Broncos. That's and regain kind of this identity of a strong defense that the Denver Broncos are used to possessing. Moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers. They're devastated. They also have an abysmal run defense. They would have loved Johnny Newton. But listen, the defensive line is still something they need to address. Running back, you're not going to take here in the first round. Wide receiver, they just drafted Quentin Johnston. They have Keenan Allen. They have Mike Williams under contract. I don't think they address it here. Again, deep class. They do need to address the defensive line, though. Defensive line is abysmal. I think they either go edge rusher here or they go corner. I can see arguments being made for Kool-Aid McKinstry to come off here, for Cooper DeJean, for Nate Wiggins, who a lot of people are rising on. But again, I'm going to go with where I feel like there's a lack of positional talent here, and there's going to be a drop-off coming here soon of edge rushers, and Jared Verse is a guy that's really flown under the radar in 2023 season. In 2023 draft, he was projected as a top 10 NFL pick, and he's lost a little bit of a stock, but he's still been just a dominant and consistent player at edge for Florida State. With Khalil Mack not being what he used to, with that defensive line struggling so much, I think Jared Verse, especially with how he elevates himself above other edge rushers, especially in run defense, the dude would be a perfect fit going to the Los Angeles Chargers system and being a major boost to not only their pass pressure on opposing quarterbacks, but also their run defense. So Jared Verse is the edge rusher I take here for them. Moving on to the Colts. Right now, we know the Colts are have one of the worst secondaries in the NFL. They need cornerback help badly. I think the way this has played out, not a single cornerback has been taken, so they get their choice of the board. My personal favorite cornerback here, or the one that I've projected the most, is Kool-Aid McKinstry. He is a dude that, 6'2", 200 pounds, just moves different compared to some of the smaller cornerbacks we've seen come out in recent years. This is a Alabama pipeline. We talk about two teams that love their Alabama prospects. It is the Colts and it is the Ravens. I think if Kool-Aid McKinstry is here on the board, they need DB help horrifically bad, and they take Kool-Aid McKinstry here with the 15th pick. The Las Vegas Raiders, they got a lot of needs. They have a lot of needs, so I think you have to just figure out best player available. And right now, in my opinion, that's going to be Malik Neighbors. Listen, it's too early. I do want to say, you could draft Shedeur Sanders here. Personally, I don't think he's going to be a great NFL prospect. There's a lot to be desired when it comes to his arm strength and his throwing motion. He is one of the longest throwing motions I've seen of a college quarterback, and I think in the NFL, he will not have that time to wind up and throw the way he does in college. I think it's going to be very detrimental. It's going to get very hard for him to get off plays in rhythm and in time at the NFL level. Plus, his arm strength leaves a lot to be desired. Not to mention the fact that he's probably going back to school and won't even be an option for anyone to draft here. So a quarterback is not an option right now for the Las Vegas Raiders. Davante Adams seems very, very upset. I think they're going to be cleaning house. They're going to get rid of Davante Adams. He might be traded away to kind of get that contract off the books. Josh Jacobs won't be coming back. They have to revamp their entire skill position players. Malik Neighbors still on the board. Some people will say that I've overlooked him for certain teams that need wide receiver help, but I think Malik Neighbors here would be the obvious pick as you try to rebuild your skill position player room under Antonio Pierce or whoever the new head coach is going to be in Las Vegas. So Malik Neighbors here goes 16 to the Raiders. Moving on to number 17. Yeah, wide receiver is going to be a massive need, but Rome Odunze, I kind of look at him more of a slot guy, and you kind of brought in Dalton Kincaid last season to be that slot guy. I don't know if you want to go out and address that in back-to-back drafts in the first round. I think they have more pressing needs on the defensive side, and they, again, deep wide receiver class, they can address it later on in the second and third round. Right here, we look at, where they've been attacked. I mean, it only takes us looking back to the even last night when the Denver Broncos game, their cornerbacks left a lot to be desired. Their secondary was abysmal. Bengals absolutely eviscerated their secondary. So they need to go out and bring a lot of help. And I know they might be scared away from, it wasn't, Kyer Elam was the Florida cornerback in that class. He wasn't the Clemson cornerback. But, when I look at the cornerback too, I'm going to go here with Nate Wiggins. He's another guy that I think is provides a larger body frame at a corner, but he just moves differently when he's on the field. He moves more fluidly than a 6'2", 6'2", 190-pound player should. And again, having your option here, the second best quarterback in the late teens in the first round, I think would be an absolute blessing for the Buffalo Bills. They need secondary help bad, and the best player on the board to help them out with that is going to be Nate Wiggins, in my opinion. On the Bengals, we see them, they need a tight end. With Brock Bowers off the board, they're not taking tight end here. Tackle, they've invested so much into Orlando Brown. They are not going to be trading, or they're not going to be taking Talise Fuaga. Also, Orlando Brown is a right tackle, that was a different analysis. I apologize. But Talise Fuaga is a right tackle, and they don't really need help at the right tackle position when it comes to the Bengals offensive line. Probably not, and again, they are in a win now window, so they're probably going to be looking for players that can contribute right now. Defensive line, both Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson are under contract for 2 more years. You have already invested quite a bit of defensive line. I could see them trying to go for safety. Cooper DeJean is still on the board. Cam Kitchens is still on the board. A lot of guys that could really bolster that secondary, but I'm anticipating that T. Higgins, given how much you just paid Joe Burrow, how much you're going to have to pay Jamar Chase going forward, T. Higgins does not seem like a guy that you're going to be able to keep in-house for much longer. Also, there's been rumblings that the relationship between the Bengals and T. Higgins has soured a bit here in the 2023 season. So I think you tag him, you trade him, you bring in some draft capital, and you go out and you try to build a better wide receiver room around T. Higgins. Roma Dunze is still on the board here, and I think he's going to fill the role that T. Higgins leaves quite admirably. Again, a really high-end wide receiver prospect. I love what he's done in Washington with Michael Penix Jr. throwing the ball, and he's only going to get an upgrade with Joe Burrow throwing the ball as long as he doesn't have a calf injury. So yeah, I'm anticipating T. Higgins leaves in free agency in some way, shape, or fashion, and they bring in Roma Dunze to replace him. That's a very likely scenario in my head. Coming in here for the Saints, they need help on the defensive edge. Cam Jordan is getting up there in years. But, this is a very solid team. They are a team that I don't think there is that many needs. I don't think there's one glaring weakness of the Saints. They got good wide receivers. They have running backs. Jameis Winston, they're committed to Derek Carr. It's not going to be a quarterback. Tight ends, they're pretty set at with Taysom Hill. Offensive line is pretty good. They've invested quite a bit into that offensive line. Again, Talise Fuaga, I'm not taking the risk on him this early in the draft. Maybe you look at J.C. Latham, but you're still trying to develop Trevor Penning as it comes to that tackle role. I think, you go with what could be a best player available here. We've seen the Saints be willing to take risks on players with some question marks around them come draft time, whether it's medical red flags or, character concerns or just performance concerns at all. So you look at Latu. He's an incredible talent. He's been absolutely dominant for the Bruins this season. He just has that insane medical red flag of being medically disqualified a couple years ago and having to transfer school in order to play again. You don't know how it's going to impact, his longevity or his health at the NFL level. But I think here at the end of towards the end of the teens in the NFL draft, they will be willing to take that risk on them. Cardinals. Now, again, you went out, you got your quarterback, you've established so far, even through one game, in my opinion, but I'm assuming that over the course of the season, they established that Kyler Murray is the guy going forward, given the contract they've given him. They went out, they got Marvin Harrison, the best wide receiver prospect. What do you do now? You could turn to the defensive side. You still got guys like Cooper DeJean, Cam Kitchens, Kalen King, even that you could talk about on the defensive line or on the defensive side of the ball, which has certainly been a major issue when it comes to what the Cardinals need to put out on the field. And I get it, Jonathan Gannon is a defensive head coach. However, we still know that the offensive line for the Cardinals is going to be absolutely horrific. It's been one of the biggest woes in last offseason, and I still think going into the 2024 offseason will be something they need to address. Now, I would be willing to take a risk on Tyrese Fuaga here. However, Tyrese Fuaga is a right tackle. They drafted Paris Johnson Jr. in 2023, who is also a right tackle. Unless they want to shift one of these guys to left tackle, it does not make sense to take Tyrese Fuaga. However, where they do need help is going to be a guy that could provide guard and tackle flexibility, guy that I think would be a guy that I really like. I think is a little bit underrated in this class is Graham Barton. He can play on the inside of the line. He can play on the outside. He can jump around all over, depending on what position you need. And given, the mobility of Kyler Murray, and given that he is a little bit of an undersized quarterback, you need to protect him. And you need to hold up that offensive line, give him time for the offense to develop and progress down the field. So I would be taking Graham Barton, given the flexibility he provides, and just building that wall around Kyler Murray to help protect him a little bit more. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings. They need help badly on the defensive side of the football. Unfortunately, they have played themselves out of contention for a quarterback. I know Kirk Cousins wasn't the long-term plan going into the season. I don't know how they're going to address it, but right now it's not at pick 21. A quarterback is not on the board for them, in my opinion. Wide receiver, they're set at. I don't think the offensive line is actually quite stable. They might need a center, might need a guard, but overall, they've done well to construct a more than competent offensive line. However, if we want to look at defensive side, they have struggled. They have been just one of the best matchups for opposing defenses through the air and on the ground. So I think if you look at a guy like Cooper DeJean, if you get past the stigma of a white cornerback, I think he's incredibly talented and can play. He has slot corner flexibility. He can move back into a safety, into a spy role. He's very flexible. They just develop very hard-hitting physical athletes. I think he's going to fit great in that Brian Flores defense, and they take Cooper DeJean at the cornerback position. When it comes to the Dallas Cowboys, I think right now, you look at a team that actually made some competent moves this past offseason to fill some needs. They brought in Brandon Cooks, and that's finally actually turning some heads. Listen, I understand wide receiver, Michael Gallup is not the long-term pass, but they've invested a lot of money into him. Brandon Cooks might not be your long-term plan, but you've invested a lot of money into him. I don't know if you turn your head towards a wide receiver this early in the draft. I think you want to focus on potentially future-proofing your team. And I think one of the biggest areas that you want to address with the Dallas Cowboys is how do you future-proof Tyron Smith at left tackle? Again, that's a left tackle. Tyrese Fuaga is a right tackle. Unless you want to flip him to the other side, he's not going to be the guy that's going to be the most plug-and-play offensive tackle here for the Cowboys. I think given his injury history, given how important that offensive line is to the identity of the Dallas Cowboys, you got to go out and you got to take a tackle. I'm going to give them J.C. Latham out of Alabama here at number 22. At number 23, we're going to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Fairly easy pick, in my opinion. A team that bases their identity on the defensive side of the football. They have one glaring weakness when it comes to the defensive side of the football, and that's going to be in the secondary at the safety position. They haven't really found someone to replace the loss of Terrell Edmonds, not Tremaine Edmonds. Got to get confused with them. With Cameron Kitchens still on the board here, I think he is going to be a very do-it-all safety prospect that's going to add a lot more value than just kind of a sit in the back, kind of watch it all safety. I think he's going to be, he was very highly rated coming into the 2023 college football season. He's fallen a little bit down draft boards due to the lack of production that the the University of Miami team has had overall. But I think he would be he'd be that final missing piece to reignite that steel curtain defense that Mike Tomlin has been missing. So Cameron Kitchens here, I think they take the shot on a guy who they need to bolster and make that final piece. Joey Porter Jr. has had an incredible rookie season. I hope that keeps developing for him, and Cameron Kitchens will be great to bolster that secondary. All right, look down further towards the Houston Texans. Now, this is where I'm finally taking the risk on Fuaga. We've seen them have just every single struggle under the sun when it comes to the offensive line. They're down to like their third stringers for the offensive line at some point. They're playing well. You have, again, some wide receivers is kind of like a hodgepodge of wide receiver talent so far, but again, they've been performing well. Tank Dell is coming to his own. Nico Collins has been playing great as the ex wide receiver. Again, I think when you look at the talent left on the board, yes, you could go after some defensive linemen. You could go after a cornerback, help, who I forget his name, the other cornerback they drafted ahead of Sauce Gardner. He hasn't played the best since coming into the league. They could go on the defensive side, but right now, just given absolutely how horrific the offensive line has been, it's been atrocious for their run game. CJ Stroud, despite how great he's played in all of 2023 so far, has been under pressure constantly. I think another thing that kind of gives credit or a discredit to the offensive line is, there have been games in which Dameon Pierce or Devin Singletary have more yards after contact than actual total rushing yards, which means they're getting hit in the backfield before they even make it back to the line of scrimmage. They need some sort of help at the offensive tackle. And I think taking the swing on the upside of Fuaga here at number 24 is going to be an absolute smash pick for the Houston Texans. Moving on to the Miami Dolphins. They do have their first round pick in 2024. They didn't forfeit it like last year. Right now, I think they need help on their secondary. Offensive line is obviously going to be absolutely a need for the Dolphins. Again, you have Teron Armstead. They're perpetually injured. You want to keep, you do have a offense predicated on speed and protecting the quarterback, protecting these guys coming out of the backfield, making a lot of, a lot of movement and setup happens in the backfield, and you need time to, Mike McDaniels is a genius, but the offense runs like a Ferrari. One tiny piece falls out and the whole thing will just blow up in your face. So I understand the need for offensive line help here, but unfortunately, there's just not really any offensive linemen left that are, I think are worthy of a first round selection so far. However, they bring in Jalen Ramsey. We don't know how he's going to continue to play as he recovers from his ankle injury. But overall, we've seen their secondary, whether it's been in the safeties, whether it's been cornerbacks, has always been a little bit lacking for the Miami Dolphins. With Kalen King still here on the board, I think he's probably going to be a little bit higher rated prospect when it comes to cornerback than what PFF has him graded right here. But, as you look to move on from Jalen Ramsey and bolster that secondary, Kalen King makes a lot of sense for the Miami Dolphins defense. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, it's a team that is actually put together quite good. They have a decent offensive line. I don't know if they really need to reach for a guard or a center here in the first round. But yeah, I mean, when you look at their current edge rush depth, that's where it leaves to be desired. I think PFF hit the nail on the head with this one. They need an edge rusher, and the fact that Braylon Trice is still here on the board, I don't know if I need to explain it much further. He's, an athletic freak. He's also in the Seattle Seahawks backyard. I'm sure they have watched a lot of tape of him. They get to watch a lot of him over at the University of Washington. I think he's going to fit very nicely into their defensive play scheme if he falls to 26 here on the board. Jacksonville Jaguars. This is another team that's going to look, in my opinion, I understand there's constraints. You got to talk about, capital that's been invested, how you're going to develop players, if you have a timetable for them. But in my opinion, you have to move on from mistakes before they blow up in your face or become too much to overcome. They need edge help. The offensive line, it's had its struggles, but I think they have done enough to make a suitable offensive line. Again, I'm not going to reach for a guard or center here in the first round, especially given what's left on the board. The DBs, I don't think the DBs for the Jaguars are actually that bad. According to PFF, in the middle to deep range coverage, they have, I think, the second worst quarterback passing rating allowed when it comes to pressure and coverage grades in the middle to deep sectors of the field. So again, with Kalen King coming off here, Cameron Kitchens, Cooper DeJean coming off in recent succession, maybe they trade up to get one of those guys. But right now, I think you have to go out and try to address the major issue that you had, is that Trayvon Walker has not developed like you thought he was. You took the risk on a very toolsy prospect, on an athletic combine warrior, and it hasn't worked out. He has been night and day different from the development that Aiden Hutchinson has been. And maybe if you have drafted Aiden Hutchinson number 1 overall, you wouldn't have to be staring at this, but their pressure that they currently levy on opposing quarterbacks leaves a lot to be desired. It's not great. They're one of the worst teams when it comes to actually pressuring the opposing quarterback. And that's why you've seen a lot of offensive lines have a lot of good success against them. They need to add more help on this defensive line. And right now, JT Tuimoloau looks like the guy that is going to be the best edge rusher available left on the board right here. And just given the how far after Tuimoloau, I think the edge rusher position drops off quite a bit. So reaching for him here at the end of the first round, I think would be a very, very smart move for the Jacksonville Jaguars. However, I'm not solely convinced that they're going to be ending up with the 27th overall pick in the draft. So they could probably, maybe they move up a little bit and can take a swing on a Leatu Latu or a Braylon Trice. But here, given the 27th pick, they're going to be taking JT Tuimoloau. This is actually, and maybe you're going to be pigeonholing me into a very singular mind of thinking, but again, we have to take into the current constructs of the team builds and how they are presented to us. And this is a very similar situation that we find the San Francisco 49ers in that we saw with the San Francisco 49ers that we saw with the Cincinnati Bengals. They have an insane amount of money that has to be paid to Trent Williams, an insane amount of money that has to be paid to Javon Hargrave, an insane amount of money that has to be paid to Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. The list goes on and on and on. There is no possible way that I can fathom them giving the contract needed to retain Brandon Ayuk. And with Emeka Egbuka still on the board, I think he is the perfect replacement. He aligns more as a slot wide receiver. You have Deebo out on the boundary. You bring in Emeka Egbuka. He falls a little bit due to injury concerns, but if you're going to, sign and trade Brandon Ayuk, or if you let him go into free agency one way or the other, you have to bring another wide receiver to help complement your current skill position players. I think Emeka Egbuka would be the absolute correct pick here at the end of the first round if the 49ers are forced to make that decision regarding Brandon Ayuk. The Ravens here, we could go wide receiver. There's a lot of wide receivers left. My personal favorite wide receiver, I don't know if I agree. We can do a little bit of analysis here. Adonai Mitchell, great. Touchdown monster, red zone monster, not what the Ravens need at this moment. He's not as athletic as I think he's projected to be in the NFL. I think he does need to be a little bit more athletic. He finds separation at the college level, but when he's introduced to NFL level DBs and safeties, it's going to be a little bit harder for him to find that separation. I don't know if that athleticism is going to translate immediately to the NFL level. Xavier Worthy, he's a little bit of a smaller guy, not as small as Zay Flowers, but I think it's going to be overlapping the role that currently Zay Flowers possesses on this offense. Jalen Polk, I love a lot. He is going to be a guy that I think sneaks into the first round just based on how incredible he has played in this Washington offense. He's a guy that I think is going to be one of the major risers when it comes to combine and the pre-draft process. But, you still have OBJ. Whether he comes back or not, that's a whole other question in and of itself. Rashad Bateman, clearly, I think that's another thing where you have to admit that that's a mistake and you have to move on from it. But again, we've talked about this ad nauseum. It's a very deep wide receiver class. There's so many guys I like. Ladd McConkey, Malachi Corley, Brian Thomas, Torrey Horton, Troy Franklin. Just so much talent down the board that I think they can probably get a guy in the second round that's going to be commensurate with Adonai Mitchell or Xavier Worthy. So I think they need to address a more pressing matter for them, which is going to be the cornerback position. They got rid of Marcus Peters in the offseason, and they just haven't been able to shut down opposing wide receivers like you need to be in a dominant AFC conference. So we're looking at the cornerback position. I love Josh Norman. I love Josh Newton. I think he's really underrated. Even before he transferred to TCU, he's just a guy I believe it was Central Michigan was his previous. He's a guy, when you look at cornerbacks that translate well to the NFL, you're looking at guys that have done it for more than one season. He has been an elite shutdown corner. Even before he transferred to TCU, he was allowing an opposer passer rating of 52.9, which is an elite metric by a cornerback. He's continued that play at TCU. I think he's going to be an incredible cornerback prospect, a little bit underrated. And definitely a guy that I would be slotting here into the first round. Moving on to the Detroit Lions. Again, you got to correct your mistakes. You have to move on from players. And I understand you invested a top or a 12 overall pick in Jameson Williams, but whatever you have, it's been alluded to by Dan Campbell at press conferences that he does have character concerns. They do have issues with his work ethic, with the overall, character he has, not alone that he hasn't been able to integrate himself very much into this offense. I think you need another wide receiver to pair with Amon-Ra St. Brown. and you're going to need a downfield. You're going to need a field stretcher, a deep threat. Despite the drop concerns, Xavier Worthy has showed that he's increased just a little bit when it comes to handling the ball and maintaining the catch through the catch point. And I think Xavier Worthy does come in here at the end of the first round and is a great wide receiver prospect as they lessen. I mean, they brought in Donovan and Peoples-Jones at the trade deadline. He's not the long-term plan, but I think it's more indicative of their thought process towards the long-term plan of Jameson Williams. So they're going to go out. They're going to grab Xavier Worthy here to hopefully add in a deep threat alongside Amon-Ra St. Brown. Kansas City Chiefs. We could look at Leonard Taylor here. We know Chris Jones is on a 1-year deal currently, but they got to get him done. I mean, he is integral to the identity of this Kansas City defense. I cannot fathom a situation in which Chris Jones does not come back to the Kansas City Chiefs this offseason. Again, I think they're going to want someone to pair. Rashee Rice has established himself as a wide receiver, but I think, Kadarius Toney's time is limited. Sky Moore's time is limited. Mecole Hardman, I don't think is in the future plan. I think this is another, a lot of wide receivers coming off here fast and furious towards the end of this first round mock. I think Jalen Polk will be the perfect pairing. He's a little bit bigger wide receiver, a little bit more physical, absolutely dynamic. I think he would pair really well with Rashee Rice. I think Rashee can move a little bit more inside to the slot. You obviously have Travis Kelce. Jalen Polk can be more of your boundary wide receiver. I think he would be a fantastic addition to this this Kansas City wide receiver core. And lastly, we're going to end with the Philadelphia Eagles. Listen, they might honestly want to follow suit, but I think after this point, after Jalen Polk got taken, after Xavier Worthy got taken, I don't know if there's any guys that I would feel comfortable taking in the first round as far as wide receiver talent. I think they look at it and say, hey, listen, the top 5 wide receivers are off the board. Maybe something we can address. Like I said, there's so many guys down the board, like a Torrey Holton, Troy Franklin, Malachi Taylor. Like, listen, Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU, you can address that later on in the draft. I think right here, we know from a fact, just based off of Howie Roseman's draft history, he builds for the future and he builds around the trenches. His entire draft strategy is build the offensive line, build the defensive line. If we look at the the first round picks, they are wildly skewed towards building around the trenches. We can look at a guy that I want to look at here is Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. Definitely a defensive lineman that you could say, hey, listen, this might be Fletcher Cox's last year. He might have to move on, but you've prepped for your defensive line. You brought in Jordan Davis. You traded up one spot to go grab Jalen Carter last year. I don't know if defensive line is going to be the biggest issue that you need to address this offseason. However, I think it should not go unsaid that Lane Johnson has speculated his retirement. I think when it comes to building up depth of the offensive line, this might be the least amount of depth the Philadelphia Eagles have had at offensive line after they lost Isaac Seumalo in free agency. And their other draft pick from the 2020 or the 2019 draft went and signed with the Tennessee Titans. Not that that was a major loss by any means, but he was a backup swing tackle for them. Lane Johnson's getting up there in age. He has had injury concerns down the stretch of the 2022 season. There has been certain scares in the 2023 season. Amarius Mims out of Georgia. First off, the Georgia, the Philly Dogs, the Georgia Dogs. We have the Philadelphia to Georgia connection. I was also considering Kamari Lassiter as a cornerback here, just based on the injuries that they have sustained at their DB position. But right now, I think they do need to address the trenches. We know from historically that how he attacks the trenches in the first round. You need to have a backup plan for when Lane Johnson inevitably does retire. So Amarius Mims is going to round out my draft here, going to the Philadelphia Eagles at number 32. That's going to be it for our draft. Hopefully we talked about, I'm good for right now. Thanks, PFF. So that's going to be, guys that I really like, guys that I am keeping my eye on as it comes to college football, people that have, stood out to me as players that are worthy of first round consideration. Also, what the state of the current NFL teams that I talked about here, and what they need to be focusing on, whether it's addressing it in free agency or addressing it in through the draft. But yeah, I think this is just a fun exercise. I know this is obviously not even close to right or even, close to accurate when we revisit the draft in 7 months or so from this point. But, I'm sure there'll be a lot of talk, a lot of risers, a lot of followers, but this was a fun exercise to do in the midseason. I hope you guys enjoyed. Leave your comments down below. And until next time, guys, we'll be having a fun episode. Next week's going to be trade targets. With trade deadlines coming up, we'll be talking about guys that you should either be trading away or trading low on in order to bolster your end of season playoff push. But until next time, take care.